The guard room crackled with red light and the wail of a siren. The lamp above the entrance was blinking like crazy, tearing away the last of his sleep. Yegor jumped up, wiping sleepy drool from his lips and cursing under his breath. He knew he had fallen asleep. He knew he was going to get into trouble. He glanced at the monitors and was stunned. Not people. Some kind of lumps of flesh on all fours and out of order, as if someone had twisted them in a meat grinder and then glued them back together. On the screen you could see how they were gathering in one fat pile by the fence and moving like worms in a ditch. He pulled the alarm switch. The siren swept by like death with a scythe. He grabbed the receiver and screamed, breaking his voice. "Multiple penetration! Guards to arms, damn it! They're breaking us!" The zombies were already crawling across the concrete, as if they weren't people at all, but some unknown liquid with bones. Their hands were scraping the wall, their fingers were breaking. But they kept climbing and climbing as if they didn't care about the pain, about gravity, about anything. The first one fell from the fence. His shoulder was twisted, half his face was torn off, but he got up and kept going, as if he was driven by a whip from the inside. 3 more fell after him, and a second later they were scurrying towards the training ground, bending like broken dolls. Yegor yelled over the intercom. "Post number 2, bastard! Report! Do you see this shit? These are not people! I repeat, not people!" There was no answer, only the crackle of interference. The boys at the other posts were already bustling about. Curses were flying from the windows, machine guns were being carried outside, and someone had already started shooting. Single shots, then long bursts. The air trembled from the shots, but the carrion on its feet kept moving, as if they had been driven out of hell to a living meat feast. Yegor grabbed the chuka, put on the magazine, pulled the bolt and yelled across the entire corridor. "Help! To arms! Let's welcome the guests as we were taught, bitch!" The door swung open and fighters poured out of the barracks, some in underpants, some barefoot, but all with weapons, their eyes full of incomprehension and fear. Someone puked right in the doorway, seeing one of the creatures run to the warehouse and jump, plunging its face into the glass. The glass cracked, couldn't withstand it. It became cobwebby, and immediately a stench gushed out from the other side, like from a cesspool. The creatures weren't just coming. They smelled people like dogs smell meat. There were a shitload of them. Yegor took up a position by the railing, watching as the first freaks were already running across the parade ground, one of all 4, missing an arm with his guts sticking out, but with eyes as if someone had lit a fire in them. He aimed the barrel and fired a burst. It worked. One fell, jerked, and went silent. The rest stumbled but crawled on. A scream came from below. Someone was grabbed. Then the cracking of bones, a squeal, and silence. One of the fighters recoiled and covered his face with his hands. He could not stand it. Yegor growled, "Stop! If you take a step back, I'll shoot you myself." Another wave of bodies climbed over the fence, and it became clear, this is not an attack, this is an invasion, and it will never end. An hour later, everything was quiet. Even the seemingly endless siren fell silent, as if it had realized the futility of its cries. The territory of the unit was strewn with bodies, both living and dead, although now it was hard to tell which was which. Smoke was coming out of the destroyed guardhouse, and the remains were lying around the parade ground, without heads, without arms, in boots only. The rest, those who had not been torn apart, were now walking. They were walking slowly, uncertainly, as if remembering what it meant to live. Someone was dragging a leg, another was pulling a machine gun behind him. Another, missing an arm and with protruding ribs, was chewing on his jacket. Some zombies still held their weapons, pulling the triggers senselessly, bursts tearing the air in vain, shattering concrete and glass. They collided, growled dully, sometimes attacked each other, as if the instinct to eat did not give them peace. All this was more like a bad trip, like something they told stories about around a campfire somewhere near Mosier, but not reality. Yegor, covered in someone else's blood, and with trembling fingers, barricaded himself in the eastern fortification, where they usually kept ammunition. There was a heavy steel door there. He slammed it behind him, inserting a bolt and propping it up with a box of grenades. There was one bullet left in the magazine, the last greeting from all this military service. He tried to get in touch, yelled into the air, tapped the receiver until he realized it was no use. Then he just turned on the receiver. The radio hissed. Then a message came through. "Attack on 1272. We require reinforcements. These are zombies, your mother." Then a crackle. Curses, screams, machine gun fire. Then a voice. "Third support. Penetration. Casualties among personnel. We..." Damn. And again shooting, like nails on iron. Yegor turned off the radio. He didn't need it anymore. He slid down the wall into the corner, clutching his head in his hands, listening to the shuffling of boots outside and the rustling of rotten palms on the concrete. His thoughts were confused, but one stood out like a bullet in the chamber. That's it. Fuck. The end. Without explanation, without warning, everything just collapsed. The world as he knew it burned down in one evening. He took out a photograph. Lenka, his girl. The same one who whispered to him at night to hold on, not to get into debt, to take care of himself. He looked into her eyes, so alive, so familiar, as if she was about to speak. But no. He ran his finger along the cheek in the picture, then sighed. He slowly took the machine gun. He brought the barrel under his chin and froze. The city that loomed behind the fiery wall of the unit seemed to waver at first. Reflections darted in the windows. Somewhere on the horizon an alarm went off, crimson, as if someone was begging the heavens for mercy. And then everything burst open like an abscess. Residential buildings burst into flames, smoke billowed, sirens began to whistle. Something wild rushed from the streets. Not just panic, but a roaring wave of screeching, horns, roaring engines, and screams. People rushed about, not understanding what was happening. Cars crashed into each other. Someone ran out of the entrances with backpacks. Children cried, women screamed into phones, but there was no salvation. The zombies, having broken through the perimeter of the unit, rushed into the streets. They devoured the first ones silently, quickly. The rest simply began to transform. Minutes passed, and the city was drowning in its own flesh. The density of attacks grew. Each new body, bitten, fell, got up, and went into battle again. The streets became labyrinths of meat. Some tried to defend themselves by setting up barricades of cars. Some shot back from windows, and some simply hid in storage rooms, praying not to be found. A low rumble was heard over this hell. A military helicopter was landing, heavy as death, black as coal. It passed over the main street. Searchlights cut through the night smoke. A pilot in a helmet, an emotionless face, watched from the side. The command channel crackled in the headphones. "We've lost 1272. The highway to the south is clogged," said a dry voice. "Check the exit on the western side. We need reconnaissance. Give the command over the loudspeaker. Civilians retreat. An armored group is moving out in an hour. Do not clog the highway. I repeat, the highway must be clear." The pilot paused, looked down. The highway was completely blocked. Cars were parked bumper to bumper. Someone had abandoned a car right on the turn. Hoods were smoking. There was a lot of chopping going on in several places. People were falling out of doors, fighting for their last meter of life. "It's too late," the pilot muttered, without taking his hand off the steering wheel. "The highway is already in the ass. It's like hell there." Fuss, cars upside down. There are probably zombies there too. "I see. Is there a special group on board?" The airwaves clicked. "Confirmed. 5. Full gear," the pilot replied. "Drop them off at the Orion. That's the skyscraper by the highway. We need to set up an outpost. Organize surveillance." The helicopter turned and went lower, gliding between the smoke plumes like a shark in black water. The special forces checked their equipment. Machine guns, 5 magazines on their chests, knives, first aid kits, one with an RPG on his back. Everyone's faces were like bricks. No fear, no emotion, only anger and inner silence. They knew where they were going. One, a young man, only said, "If things don't go according to plan, don't quit. A bullet is better." 15 minutes later, the helicopter hovered over the concrete roof of Orion, a huge building whose roof provided 360-degree visibility. The task force jumped down one after another, landing lightly, like cats. Number 1, Storm, gave the go-ahead. The others scattered, checking corners, ventilation, attic hatches. The pilot held the machine in place, the blades squealing with tension. While the fighters were setting up a barrier of folding shields and securing the turret, one of them leaned toward the ventilation shaft. And then the grate exploded like a firecracker on New Year's Eve. The first one fell out, black, long as a stick, covered in slime and shreds of flesh. He fell onto the concrete, but immediately got up, crossing his arms. The others followed him, quickly, pushing, clinging with crooked fingers. One caught the edge and pulled himself out like a spider. "Contact! Contact!" yelled Storm, opening fire. A burst pierced one at point-blank range. Blood hit the railing. The second fighter fired an RPG straight into the shaft. The explosion lit up the sky. Fire rushed out, but the zombies were already here. The meat grinder began. Bullets were flying. Shells were falling. The turret was crushing heads, but there were too many of them. One Special Forces soldier fell. They grabbed him by the legs and pulled him to the ventilation. The second one rushed to help him, but was hit in the neck. Blood was flowing like a fountain. Then knives came into play. Then silence. The pilot tried to lift the helicopter off the roof, but the creatures were hanging from the chassis like devils on a witch's broom. The machine rocked. The propeller caught a zombie, tearing it to pieces, but the others could not be stopped. One of them broke the cockpit glass with his head and grabbed the pilot's face. Blood flew onto the instruments. The machine fell over. The propeller crashed into the concrete, and everything went to hell. The explosion rocked the building, and flames shot upward, illuminating everything. Debris, flesh, flames, all crashed down into the streets where the carnage was still going on. The roof of the Orion was ablaze like a torch, and it was a sign there would be no outpost, no defense, only death. And while 2 more helicopters circled in the sky, watching this nightmare somewhere below, in the basement of the old unit, Yegor was still sitting, clutching his head. Lenka's photograph was shaking in his hands. There was still a cartridge in the barrel. In the underground bunker of the headquarters, hidden under government buildings, there was a nervous bustle, not like in the movies, with clear orders and clipped speech, but the real thing, with sweat, fear, and the smell of overheated electronics. Radios hissed, phones crackled, paper maps on the tables were covered with coffee stains. Lights on the screens flickered, showing new foci of infection that flared up like matches in a dry forest. Operators feverishly copied coordinates, adjusted evacuation routes, which immediately found themselves under attack. The commander of the ground forces, General Terekin, stood against the wall, leaning on the table, and pointing a pointer at the map with a trembling hand. His left hand was shaking treacherously, both from the cold and from the pressure in his chest. He had long felt that his heart was acting up, but he had coped until now. Now, looking at the map, where 2/3 of the territory was painted crimson, he knew that no army academy had prepared him for this. "We have lost control over most of the country," he said, looking wearily at the operatives. "This is not an outbreak, not a local threat. This is a massacre. We do not have enough time, resources, people. We are assembling assault groups from conscripts, damn it. We are taking water intakes, food warehouses, nuclear facilities under protection. But everything changes every hour, not even an hour, 10 minutes. We do not know what will happen tomorrow. We are not even sure that we will live to see dawn." The hall grew quiet. You could hear water dripping from a cooler somewhere in the corner. One of the colonels clenched his fist. Another gritted his teeth. They were military men, but not idiots. Everyone understood where this was all heading. And then Admiral Sokolov, the fleet commander, spoke, gray-haired, calm as a rock. He grinned, but not from joy, from helplessness, from the habit of hiding fear behind bravado. "The ships at anchor are fully prepared," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The ports have been eaten, yes. The coastline is broken, but on the water there is order. We can control the coastal zone. For now. If there is an order, we can evacuate the command to the ships. Or at least try. No one answered. Everyone understood that the word evacuation already sounded like capitulation. The Air Force Commander-in-Chief did not show up for the briefing at all. He was in Europe, at an aircraft construction exhibition when it all began. His deputy stood up, pale as death, and reported without embellishment. The Air Force essentially no longer exists. The airfields have been attacked, the runways are littered with equipment, and some bases are infected. Of all the vehicles in the air, only those that left immediately after the first signals remain. Communication is unstable. There is no control. We cannot strike. We do not know where, or at whom. Everything is too fast. The commander-in-chief, an old general with a face like granite, stood by the map on the wall. He was silent. His eyes were empty, like asphalt after an airstrike. No emotion, no expression. He knew there had to be a decision. He had given orders all his life, in peacetime, in hotspots, during mobilizations. He was used to responsibility, but this was different. There was no enemy here. There was no front line, and there was no time. The same question sounded in his head. What can we do at all? He looked at the map, where the crimson spots were expanding, blocking highways, devouring cities, reaching borders. He remembered how a week ago he had signed a paper on the construction of a new fuel and lubricants depot near Kursk. And now this depot was burned down, and behind it stood hundreds of creatures with empty eyes. He knew that if he did not give the order to use WMD now, everything would collapse. But giving it meant taking responsibility for the deaths of thousands, if not millions. We have no plan, he said quietly, as if to himself. Only guesses, only reactions. We are losing control of the country in real time. No one interrupted him. He looked up, looked at Tarakan, then at the Admiral, at the empty chair of the Deputy Commander of the Air Force, at the map. Bring out the reserves. All of them. Block the routes. Isolate the hotbeds. Burn them out. From the air, from the ground, it doesn't matter. We won't hold the cities. At least the borders. At least the strategic hubs. He fell silent, watching the crimson spots approach the major centers. At that moment, a signalman ran into the bunker, out of breath, with a wet shirt and a dictaphone in his hand. He was shaking like an aspen leaf. The city of Volchsk, he croaked. That's it. It's gone. Completely. Not a single signal. They're moving fast. Not like usual. They're walking along the highway. Fast. Running. The silence became unbearable. The next phase was beginning, and headquarters still had no answer. In the underground complex, deep under the mountains, where there was no satellite reception and no coordinates on military maps, everything looked like a holiday for those who knew that they were the true masters of the game. There was no chaos, no fear. Only calm faces, steady lamplight, and the cold shine of metal. The laboratory did not belong to any country. There were no flags hanging here, no anthems playing, only an emblem, a stylized circle with 3 intertwined arrows, a symbol of those who called themselves regulators. In the central block, among glass partitions and bundles of cables, terminals hummed. Monitors showed a map of the planet, with red markers smoothly spreading across it. In a separate room, through which only first-level passes were allowed, a woman lay on a polymer table fastened to a platform with titanic staples. Once a human. Now something else. A zombie. A corpse. A perfect specimen. Her skin was gray-blue, with areas where the blood vessels were clearly visible, pulsating slowly, as if something was still flowing inside her. Her hair was tangled, gray strands sticking out from under the restraining hoop. Her lips were torn and bitten, but a moan still oozed from under them, as if she felt. Her hands were thin but strong, crooked, with nails like an animal's. Her eyes were closed, but the lids trembled. The muscles beneath them were working. She was breathing. No, she was hissing. Scientists gathered behind the glass, all in identical gray suits with patches and tablets. They were monitoring the data, talking quietly. Someone was even drinking coffee, as if they were in an office at a conference. Suddenly, the doors opened. A man entered wearing an expensive jacket with a new generation respirator on his face. He was accompanied by two people in chemical protection suits, but he walked confidently, like the host of the ball. "What about the first stage?" he asked without stopping. One of the scientists, gray and predatory with narrow eyes, looked up from his tablet and grinned. "The first stage went great. The combat virus, Series 5522, has spread according to calculations. The territory will be completely cleared of the local population within 72 hours, with a minimum deviation of ±8. "What kind of crap is this?" The man nodded towards the table with the chained woman. The scientist's grin widened. He came closer to the capsule and ran his hand over the protective glass. "This," he said with a hint of pride, "is a combat self-propelled biomodule, a modified virus carrier, a reborn representative of Homo sapiens. The main strike unit. The basic model. Attack efficiency is 82%. Behavior is aggressively instinctive, completely subordinated to the viral matrix. No will, only movement, only a goal. Means of suppression? Protection?" asked the man in the jacket, still not removing his mask. "Both," the scientist nodded. "Would you like a demonstration?" He walked up to the console and pressed the touchscreen. Something twitched in the zombie's body. Its shoulders tensed, its eyelids jerked upward. The zombie woman opened her eyes. Whitish with cloudy pupils, they darted about, searching for a target. Her mouth opened, revealing torn gums from which black drool dripped. She howled, a low, animal-like rumble. The body began to twitch in its braces, trying to break free. The muscles in its arms bulged like steel cables. One of the interns stepped back, dropping the tablet. The zombie began to howl, clicking its teeth and writhing in its bonds, as if it were tearing at its prey. The scientist looked at the man in the jacket, grinned, and said, "Voila." He took out a thin syringe with amber liquid and smoothly injected it into the dead woman's neck. She shuddered, hissed, and froze. Her eyes remained open, but her muscles went limp like a cut thread. The body stopped resisting. It became a corpse, a real one. A means of suppressing the remnants of the central nervous system. Destroys all active signals. Dose 1 cube. Effect instantaneous. We have thousands of gallons of this stuff. Plan: aerial spraying. There will be no counteraction. The virus does not know how to defend itself. It is destruction, not defense. We are the creators. We are the executioners. The lights in the room lit up again. Somewhere beyond the walls, far underground, new chambers were coming to life. Dozens of biomodules were rising behind thick layers of glass, hidden, ready for the next wave. The scientist looked at the monitor where the city was burning and said quietly, "This is only the beginning." The world did not collapse in a day or an hour. It bent slowly, like a dying animal whose paws were first broken, then whose heart was torn out, but it still twitched, hoping to bite back. First, the cities burned. One, then another, then dozens at once. Each settlement turned into a petri dish. Bodies, blood, concrete, fire, and fear boiled in it. Armies disappeared in the hell of battles. The government dissolved in the ether. There was no more communication. People no longer waited for salvation. They hid, dug into basements, ran at night between the ruins like rats in the empire of the dead. When heavy aircraft with tanks of purifying aerosol took to the skies, when a chemical suppression agent was sprayed into the air, there was still faith at headquarters. In the laboratories under the mountains, they drank coffee, celebrated the successful operation, checkmarks, percentages, reports. Everything was going according to plan. But the virus was not just a weapon. It was alive. It breathed, felt, learned. And, having got into a human body, it did what it does best. It changed. The mutant cells absorbed the poison, processed it, made it part of their structure. The drug that was supposed to turn it off became a catalyst. The zombies didn't die. They evolved. A new wave began, faster, harder. Now the creatures had become organized. They stopped wandering chaotically. They began to gather. The attacks became more precise. They waited, circled, lured. Some whispered. One survivor swore that he heard his dead wife calling him with her voice, although he knew that she was lying with her head torn off somewhere on the highway. Cities died. Continents merged into a zone of silence. Satellites recorded only forests of iron and stone where there was no longer warmth. More and more often, the footage showed packs of the dead moving like companies. Not rotting loners, but clear columns, without banners, but with a purpose. People fled, some to the mountains, some to the deserts, some to the glaciers. But there was no salvation anywhere. Food was running out, water became rotten. Humanity no longer lived, it survived. The sky had changed. It had become dirty, as if the sun itself had become alien. Viral spores were carried by global winds, and even the most remote islands were not left untouched. Where no man had set foot, the dead now roamed. Even the ocean was silent. Where once there were ports and liners, there were now only rusty hulks and empty decks, where sometimes lonely silhouettes walked, their eyes without light. The human bases, the last ones, were deep in the mines, in underground stations, in bunkers from the old era. There, children learned the names of dead cities like spells. There, the elderly told how the buns smelled, how the barking of dogs sounded, how the windows with flowers looked. There, the remnants of scientists, soldiers, and doctors gathered. They were looking for a way, a plan, at least something. Some said, "It's not worth it. You just have to survive." But others stubbornly insisted that the virus is just an enemy, and the enemy can be defeated. The world belonged to the dead. They were everywhere. They felt no fear, knew no sleep, had no pity. They were the eternal winter that covered the planet. But somewhere, in the silence, a fire still smoldered. 50 people at the foot of a mountain. 9 in an abandoned missile silo near Novosibirsk. 3 in a ruined institute in northern Germany. They lived. They searched. They built. Because a person is not just meat. It is will. Memory. And sometimes it is a fire that cannot be blown out. Maybe one day it will flare up again.